Iranian and US officials have held a second round of nuclear talks, which have just concluded. Iran's foreign minister has said he wanted to achieve a fair and equitable deal. Donald Trump has repeatedly threatened military action against Iran, first over its violent crackdown on anti-government protests, and more recently over its nuclear program. Iran's supreme leader gave an address while the talks were underway, taking aim at President Trump.
The President of the United States repeatedly says that his military is the strongest in the world. But the strongest army in the world can sometimes be slapped so hard that it can no longer get up. They constantly say, "We have sent an aircraft carrier toward Iran." Sure, very well. An aircraft carrier is certainly a dangerous piece of equipment. But more dangerous than that is the weapon that can sink your carrier to the bottom of the sea. In one of his recent remarks, the President of the United States said that for 47 years America has not been able to eliminate the Islamic Republic. He complained about it to his own people. That is a good admission. And to that I say, you will not be able to do it either.
Speak to Osama bin Javaid. He's live for us in Geneva. Good to see you, Osama. So, of course, Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff are representing Washington. We've got Abbas Araghchi representing Tehran. A morning of talks, we understand, have wrapped up. What are you learning?
Well, this was a high-stakes talks, as you see that the chessboard for war has been set in the Middle East with more aircraft carriers, B-2 bombers in the sky, and more troop deployments by the United States. And that is why it was crucial for something to happen here. It was just over 2 hours where these parties met. Indirect talks again for the second time, where both sides went to the Omani foreign minister and conveyed their messages. And now we believe that has concluded. And it is not a good sign, according to many experts. Let's bring Ali Vaez into this. He's the Iran project director at International Crisis Group. Thank you very much for talking to us, Ali. There was a lot at stake here, a lot of build-up, a lot of hopes towards what's going to happen. But it concluded very quickly. What do you make of it?
It's hard to be optimistic about these negotiations that wrapped up so quickly. These are extremely complex subjects. Remember that it took 2.5 years to negotiate the 2015 nuclear deal. These talks usually require a lot of patience, a lot of focus, a lot of back and forth, a lot of discussions with experts. So if they wrap up this quickly, it's either a sign that the negotiators don't have the patience that is required to reach an agreement, or that the gaps are simply too big to be bridged.
Well, while the war drums were being rung, there is still hope for progress in mediation, right? Because Iran is no longer enriching uranium. Its proxies, if you can call them that, allies in the region, do not have that sway anymore. And it appears that it wants to bring the International Atomic Energy into the picture as well. So with all of that, how hopeful are you that there is room for good news from this?
Look, it all depends. We're talking about the questions of scope and substance. When it gets to scope, I think there is a lot of space for agreements on the nuclear front, simply because Iran's nuclear program has been degraded on the ground, and so some of the cost of a compromise is already sunk in. And it should be easier for the Iranians, for instance, to accept zero enrichment for a period of time, because they have not spun a single centrifuge since the 12-day war back in June. But when it gets to other non-nuclear questions, like regional activities or their missile program, I think at best the Iranians would be willing to do superficial concessions, not the kind of grand bargain capitulation that the United States expects. And then there are also significant disagreements about the substance of negotiations. And that is why, even if you reach a framework, it would still take a long time to hammer out the details of an agreement.
In the diplomacy of this administration, it looks like it is going for those agreements that can be quickly signed and then figure out the details later. How do you think, going forward, the Trump administration is going to be poised to either push for more talks or put its words into action about regime change in Iran?
Look, the reality is that if the diplomatic options are not very attractive, because it requires Iran to make concessions, it's very uncomfortable to do, and it would require the US to also reward Iran with sanctions relief, which is extremely uncomfortable to do, given the fact that the Iranian regime just killed several thousand of its own people. But the military options are also not very attractive. The United States, it's easy to start a war with Iran, but it's very difficult to script it. It's very difficult to get regime change just through the sole use of air power without any kind of boots on the ground. So the risks, even in a military option, are extremely high for the United States as well.
So where do we go from here? What happens now? Because the region has been on tenterhooks for more than 2 weeks now, since this troop buildup started to begin. It is not just going to be contained between the United States and Iran. There are other actors very closely watching this, and it has repercussions for the entire Middle East and beyond.
Well, we have to see what the negotiators would say about this round, whether this was just Iranians responding to U.S. proposals, the U.S. negotiators conveying that back to Washington, and another round will be scheduled. In that case, diplomacy might still have a chance. But if this was a breakdown, then the risk of war would significantly increase. Not just, by the way, a deliberate decision to go to war. With so much military firepower in a small geographic zone, there's also plenty of space for miscalculation and false flag operations.
Ali, thank you very much. That is Ali Vaez, the Iran project director at International Crisis Group. So as you now see that there is so much at stake here between Iran and the United States, and not just because it could be a bilateral thing, because Iran has been insisting that if things do not go towards diplomacy, this would most probably become a regional war.
Yeah, clearly a lot of questions about why this initial meeting was so brief that we hope to have answered sooner than later. Osama, thanks for that.
Don't miss out. Get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news and expert insights. Like, share, stay ahead.